Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this session, Taking the Mystery Out of Real-Time Text. I am Sandy Dyer from the DataMark team, and I will be, I'll be the moderator for today's session. Before we begin, I'd like to let everyone know that we are recording this session for viewing at a later time. All attendees have been muted for quality assurance purposes. We do encourage questions through the use of the Q&A section of the platform, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. I'd like to introduce our presenters, Jeff Knighton, President of Hamilton Innovations, and Tony Dunn, the National Emergency Number Association Real-Time Text Work Group Co-Chair. Jeff?
Good morning. This is Jeff Knighton. I am the president of Hamilton Innovations. Hamilton has a number of divisions that work with telecommunication relay services, also 911, next generation 911 services. My personal background in real-time text is that from the engineering standpoint. I've been working probably for over the last 20 years in deaf communication technology. And so I have a lot of background in TTY-based communication, as well as over 15 years experience working with real-time text. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit more maybe from the technical standpoint.
Hi, good morning. This is Tony Dunn. And I have over 30 years experience in the public safety industry, but prior to that, I came to public safety with a background in direct services for the deaf and hard of hearing. And so all of my 30 years of experience, I've been fortunate enough to be an advocate for equal access to emergency services for people who are deaf, deafblind, hard of hearing, or have speech impairment. And it's been a wonderful ride, and now we're on a new one with real-time text. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what your questions are at the end of our presentation and seeing what we can do to answer those. So let's take a look at our session that we are going to cover today. We will touch on what the FCC has ruled, what their timelines are for carriers, as well as get a little bit more detail in what RTT is. And then we will look at what NENA has produced, the National Emergency Number Association, the Real-Time Text Work Group, what efforts have been done in that work group and what documents are being worked on and how that's going to help PSAPs when you're looking at implementing real-time text in your agency. I also have some comments from an early adopter of real-time text that I'm able to share with you. And then we'll take a look at what steps you would need to do to be able to receive real-time text directly. So let's take a poll.
Oh, actually, before we take a poll, let's talk a little bit about the sort of the FCC timeline that made RTT really a reality in what we're talking about today. So in December 2016, the FCC issued a ruling that enabled real-time text to be supported by wireless carriers in lieu of TTY. So wireless carriers have supported TTY-based communications over their wireless networks since the early 2000s, around 2002, 2003. And as the wireless carriers have moved to 4G networks or internet protocol-based networks, they petitioned the FCC to be able to support real-time text. Their FCC made a ruling December 2016, and as part of that ruling, introduced sort of a phased approach on how real-time text would be rolled out. And so with respect to where we currently are in the timeline, the first sort of deadline was December 31st of 2017, where the carriers had to have at least one device working. At this point, you can see December 31st, 2019, that date has passed. And so as of that date, the wireless carriers, the nationwide wireless carriers, must support real-time text on all of their new wireless devices by December 31st, 2019. Now, there are a few caveats with that. For example, if the device is just an old flip phone or something like that and doesn't have a display, there's carved out exceptions for that. But pretty much for nationwide carriers, at this point, there are 3 that support real-time text, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, and they are all meeting this FCC timeline. So as of right now, most smartphone devices support real-time text in one form or another. Now, the other classification of carriers, what they call tier 2 carriers, tier 2 wireless carriers, and those are regional wireless carriers that don't have a nationwide footprint, and their timeline is a little bit relaxed versus the nationwide carriers. And so their timeline is that they have to support real-time text on all their new devices by June 30th, 2021. So they still have a little bit of time to implement that. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide and just ask a poll question of, before we really dig in too deep, how familiar are you with RTT? I'll turn it back to the moderator here for a second.
So there is a poll question that's available for your response. The poll question is, how familiar are you with RTT? The answers are, I know nothing, I've heard of it, I think that I generally understand it, I could probably teach this session. So if you could please put your response into the poll.
And certainly this question is going to really help us as the panelists kind of tailor our message for the widest possible audience.
We'll just give it a few more seconds because we still have people responding to the poll. Okay, we'll go ahead and share the results. Tony and Jeff, are you able to see the results?
I am not able to see the results.
Okay.
Maybe you could just vocalize those.
Absolutely. So of the responders, 56 of the 76 voted. 41% says they've heard of it. 36%, I think that I generally understand it. 23%, I know nothing.
Did anyone say that they would be willing to teach this session?
No. Nice try. You're still on the hook for the remainder of this time.
Okay, that's helpful. That's that helps us understand that, and this is pretty much what we expected. That there's at this point there's some knowledge of real-time text. Most of you, it seems like a large part, have heard about it, and that's probably why you joined the session, to hopefully learn a little bit more about it.
Okay, so let's dig in then. So why is RTT important? And as you see on the slide, we've got it broken out into different groups. And I'd like to share with you a little bit from the consumer perspective. I have a lot of deaf friends and some family members that are very, very excited about this technology. consumers are beginning just now to learn about it. And so for those that do know about it, they believe that it's better technology. It's more conversational. They're very excited to have the ability to actually just use the same device that they carry with them to be able to use it for real-time text as well. There's a lot of deaf grassroots organizations, deaf and hard of hearing groups, that are trying to educate their membership so that they understand what is available to them. And so I think that, you know, we're going to be seeing more usage as we go through. We'll talk a little bit about that. And also some of the, I'll call them gatekeepers to these communities, are extremely excited, and they've also done some testing to see, you know, how it works so that they can speak to that. And they've shared their testing results with us, and it's kind of helped us, it's helped educate us too as to what the user experience side of things is.
Hey, Tony,
Jeff,
could I add?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple of more things on the consumer side. And we haven't really talked about what real-time text is. So, and we'll get into that more on the next slide. But basically, on mobile phones, on mobile smartphones now, when you place a phone call, you can, during that phone call, have a voice connection, as well as be able to send and receive text characters that are sent as they are typed. And in some ways, it is mimicking what TTYs used to do for the deaf and hard of hearing community, the ability to use a TTY. But from the consumer perspective, one of the huge changes is that for the first time ever, text-based communication, conversational-based text communication that was previously only available with TTY equipment, which is specialized equipment, is now available on mainstream consumer devices. And what that means is that real-time text is not only available for people that are deaf and hard of hearing that might rely on text-based communication, but it's also available for everyone else that has a smartphone. And so from a consumer perspective, it allows people who are deaf and hard of hearing to use the same devices as people without those disabilities, and to be able to communicate, to place and receive phone calls, and have direct communication with anyone with a smartphone, as well as any other service that can either support TTY or real-time text. And that kind of brings us maybe a little bit of a perspective going into the PSAP perspective, is that while this is certainly a technology that enables inclusive communications for people with various disabilities, it's also a technology that is available for the mainstream population. And that does open up a situation where anyone might be able to use this to place a call to 911. There may be times where it is inappropriate or inconvenient, or they may not be able to speak or something like that. But there's an opportunity now for PSAPs to receive 911 calls with RTT enabled in it from mainstream devices and not these specialized TTY devices. Do you want to add more on the PSAP perspective? Tony, can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Actually, I do have a couple more things to add. Having this capability in the PSAP provides, it meets the ADA mandates of providing direct access to all populations. As Jeff said, everybody is going to have the ability to utilize this, and so we have to be prepared for that. What I do want to point out is that it does not replace SMS text to 911. So it's not an either or. Citizens are going to use whatever technology they're most comfortable with. And so PSAPs will need to consider implementing both text to 911 and SMS in the centers. But one of the benefits, I mean, so there's several benefits to PSAPs. One of the huge benefits is that in a true real-time text to real-time text environment, PSAPs will be able to hear background noises while you're typing, and that's something that we haven't been able to do with TTYs. So you can hear background noises. It's going to come in as a wireless call, a wireless voice call, and so with that, you're going to receive the location information that you would normally get with a wireless call. You will also be able to, as Jeff mentioned, type at the same time that your caller is typing and not have to take turns like when it is a TTY. We're going to talk about both today's environment as well as end-to-end RTT to RTT, but that is the benefit of RTT, is to be able to have all of these capabilities in the PSAP so that you can have better opportunities to serve the caller. There's also some technology benefits as well. Jeff, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so with real-time text is a protocol that is associated with sort of internet protocol technology. So TTY communication, that's been around for over 100 years. And that is associated with legacy sort of telephone communications. So real-time text is something that is natively supported on internet protocol networks. And from a wireless carrier standpoint, the cheat sheet to understanding that is, as wireless carriers have moved to a 4G LTE network, and that they are going to then be moving to 5G networks and then beyond, at that point, moving from 3G to 4G, that was a time where the wireless carriers implemented in 4G an internet protocol-based network. So all of your voice traffic is going over internet protocol, and that's why TTY communications was kind of problematic over that 4G network, and real-time text is really the solution over it. So from a technology perspective, we have a modern protocol that is in alignment with modern internet-based technologies. And it does allow there to be a lot of technological improvements to make this available, again, on mainstream devices and for mainstream use moving forward. And so for the first time, we are able to sort of break away from the legacy environment with TTY. And that's an exciting thing, to be able to break away from that. TTYs have served a valuable purpose, but they have always been limited in their capabilities. So maybe we can move on to the next slide, and then we can kind of delve into that just a little bit more, some of the differences. Oh, I guess, yeah, go for it, next slide. So on this,
Jeff, sorry, can I just interrupt 1 second?
Sure.
I apologize. I just did want to explain about the document that this information that Jeff is about to speak to. It can be found in the NENA RTT Working Group's PSAP guidelines for RTT readiness document. And a lot of very, very smart people worked on this document, both from the technology industry as well as from PSAP operations. And this document is currently in the review process and will be made available to everyone once the process has been completed. Within this document, it really defines RTT in great detail, what it is and how it works. And it provides diagrams that actually shows, a breakout into the 5 sections of the RTT call path. And it has a particular section, as Jeff is about to explain, with regards to the technology planning for networks, call handling, and the testing needed. So let's move into that in the next slide. And Jeff, will you pick it up from there?
Sure, absolutely. So this slide is a slide where we're going to talk a little bit about 3 technologies that all are text-based, and there's some differences between them. And we want to kind of clarify really the differences between TTY communication, text to 911 or SMS communications, and then native real-time text. Now we have in here native real-time text instead of just saying real-time text, because when we get to the next slide, we're going to talk through a little bit that real-time text can be converted on the fly to TTY. And so we'll get to that on the next slide. But here I want to talk about the 3 protocols that deal with text-based communications. So TTY is the one that it's the oldest one. It's the one that we have had some familiarity with, although there are very few TTYs that people are using today and that they are using to call 911. TTYs, they really work by making a phone call and then using the voice channel of the phone call to be able to send a series of tones that can be reconstructed into text characters and to be then displayed on the recipient side. As part of that, what some of the limitations of them with TTY communications is that you have to take turns. There's also, TTYs are susceptible to having what we call garbling, which is where you transmit some characters and they don't come across reliably. They can be lost, they can be corrupted, and you have to, the other side has to instruct, hey, can you type that again? Now, TTY does also have, because it produces tones over the voice channel, you can actually, with TTY, you can use voice and text by kind of taking turns. And it supports things like voice carryover, where one side speaks and the other side types. Well, real-time text, I'm going to jump to the 3rd column a little bit. Real-time text, in many ways, has some similarities with TTY in that the call is, you set up a voice call and you have a conversation. So somebody dials, somebody answers, you're in a conversation. That conversation has a voice component that's always sort of available. One of the big differences between TTY and real-time text is that the real-time text, when you're actually transmitting text characters, they don't produce tones that overlap on the voice channel. So those text characters are transmitted silently in parallel with the voice. And because of that, it means that the text characters can be sent while you are speaking and that there is no turn taking that is needed. There's no collision between the characters so that one side can interrupt the other side. Additionally, the text characters are a lot faster in how they are transmitted and have a much better character set. The TTY character set is basically limited to uppercase characters, numbers, and a few special characters, whereas the real-time text character set is it's basically the Unicode character set. It's a full character set, and it can transmit whatever you want. So TTY, real-time text is kind of the successor protocol to TTY. Now, there is the differences between real-time text and SMS text to 911. In some ways, they're similar in that they both have the same type of character set. The real big difference is that SMS text is not conversation-based, meaning you do not dial a phone number and have the other side answer it and set up a session and then hang up. I know when we get text to 911 that comes into a PSAP, it can appear that way, but from the consumer standpoint, it's a fire and forget, a store and forward for text messages. And so real-time text isn't a natural successor for SMS. It's very complementary to text to 911. And both of them have the same type of character set. I do want to talk a little bit from the protocol standpoint of how real-time text will now come in to a PSAP. So we know with text to 911 that when it was made available, text to 911, PSAPs had to go through a process to elect to receive it. And there's 3 mechanisms for text to 911 that a PSAP can utilize to receive it. They can receive it either as a TTY call through a web interface or through a next generation 911 interface over an EZINet, and that's that MSRP thing. Well, for real-time text delivery into a PSAP, one of the differences is that the wireless carriers will automatically convert the real-time text to TTY and deliver it to 911 as a TTY call without the PSAP having to do anything. But then as PSAPs are able to migrate to a next generation 911 network, they have an ability to request of the carriers to deliver real-time text, not transcoded to TTY, but to deliver it natively. And when they deliver it natively, then you get all of the benefits of real-time text. And so there is a cohesive transitional strategy that enables people, as they have real-time text available on their mobile phones, they can use that real-time text and call 911 today without the PSAPs having to do something to receive it. The PSAPs will receive it as a TTY. Before we go to the next slide, Tony, anything to add on here?
No.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So when in the situation where real-time text is delivered to PSAPs as a TTY call, there can be a lot of, that's a good thing that the FCC mandated. Now, there are also some challenges with it. So the good part is that you can have successful communication with a PSAP. The challenge is that the person who is using real-time text on their mobile phone, they think they are communicating with real-time text, so that they can use the full character set, that they can send and receive characters silently, and the PSAP is going to think that it is a TTY call. And so there is really nothing that informs either side that the other side is using the other protocol. Now, there are some guidelines, and this is one slide that talks about some of them. There are some guidelines and procedures that can be put in place to sort of mitigate some of the less desirable aspects of having that transcoding be put in place. The best thing is everyone to move to next generation 911 and be able to support native real-time text so that we don't have to transcode. But when we do have to transcode, there are some things that you should be aware of. That with TTYs, like for example, the @ character is not something that a TTY can send or receive. And so the place where the wireless carrier is transcoding it, when there is an @ character, it's going to be replaced with a parenthesis, AT parenthesis. And there's this list here of different characters that are going to have to be converted on the fly to help with the communication. And then at the bottom one is, if there's other characters that get communicated on the real-time text side that aren't part of this small list, then they will get replaced with an apostrophe. So what it means is that at the PSAP, there is an opportunity to first of all recognize that if you get a TTY call and it's from a wireless phone and people are starting to type things, you may have to compensate a little bit for the notion that they may be and likely be on a device that's real-time text that doesn't quite know that this communication is being converted to TTY. Maybe I'll stop there and we can, Tony, do you have anything, or maybe go to the next slide?
I think we need to go to the next slide, and also I'm not sure, but if you type your questions into the screen, I know that Sandy will be reviewing those, and she will be helping us with the question and answer period after we have completed all the slides.
Okay, so on this slide, let's talk a little bit about the mechanisms how a PSAP will receive RTT. So I don't know if you can read what's here, but let's start with the notion that you have an RTT phone, a wireless phone. That's at the top left-hand side. So that goes to the wireless carrier, which is represented by that CMSP infrastructure network. So let's say that that's like Verizon, just to pick on one carrier. As it stands in the sort of the existing world, the pathway that PSAPs, most PSAPs today, would be receiving that RTT call is on the left-hand most sort of pathway, where the wireless provider would send the call to a gateway, which would go to the legacy emergency services network. So that's your selective router. So the call would go from the wireless carrier to a gateway to the selective router. It would be delivered into your PSAP, and it would arrive as a TTY call. So that is the pathway that is sort of the default initial step of the transitional plan pathway. And again, that's fantastic that that was architected that way, because it allows for successful communication starting day one, even if it's not the ideal communication. The ideal communication is the one that is represented by the pathway that leads to the far right-hand side. And the ideal communication is one where the wireless carrier is able to deliver the call to the ESINet, so the Next Generation Emergency Services Network. And then from the Emergency Services Network, you have now an option of two different pathways. You either have a legacy PSAP off of the ESINet, or you have a Next Generation 911 capable PSAP on the ESINet. So in the situation where there's a legacy PSAP on an ESINet, then it becomes the responsibility of the ESINet vendor to perform that RTT to TTY transcoding and deliver it to the legacy PSAP. And then in the ideal scenario, you have a Next Generation 911 PSAP, and you are able to deliver the call as native real-time text to that PSAP. It is in that pathway, so the one that follows the right-hand side, that is the sort of the final destination here. And it's only when we get to the final destination of that pathway that the citizen who is placing the call to 911 and the call taker handling that 911 call, that they are able to communicate using all of the benefits of native real-time text, where you can type back and forth in both directions, you can interrupt each other, you have the full character set, you don't have any of the limitations of the transcoding from TTY to RTT and back and forth. The first two pathways, the ones that lead to legacy PSAPs, those do enable successful communication, albeit somewhat impaired by the notion that you have to do this transcoding in the middle from these gateways between real-time text and TTY. Maybe go to the next slide.
So as you can see, there's a lot of different scenarios that the PSAP needs to be aware of, and tracking with that, then there's operational issues that need to be considered. And within the document in section 5.2, we do address those operational issues, one of which is standard operating procedures. So you would need those procedures for today, and then as Jeff alluded to, you know, the interim and then the final stage. So it's really critical because of the variables that exist out there and how we're dealing with these calls that are coming in. And he's already spoken to the special characters that we might need to, you know, include in our training sessions. And as you see in our document, we also have sections for training and public education, but we have other working groups that are getting into more details into the training and public education. We do actually put it in here so that we can give you some basic information and then refer you to, you know, what's coming out there. In our SOPs section of the document, we did include the NENA standards, the TTY, TDD communication standard operating procedure model recommendations, so that we are still tracking with consistency in how we're dealing with TTY calls. But we may need to now include one more step, and we address that in the document, that you may want to add a query to the caller to find out if they initiated their call with TTY or RTT. And that way, you know kind of how to respond back to them and help them understand that GA is going to be required at this time if you are in a legacy PSAP environment. Next slide. So we have a poll for you. The question is, how often do you challenge wireless silent open line calls with a TTY? And the answers, options are never, sometimes, usually, and always. Could you go ahead and respond to those? And Sandy, when you have the results, would you please share?
Yes, ma'am. We're going to give it a few more seconds. Currently, only 22% have voted at this time. And folks, it's okay to say never. We're not going to know it's you. I mean, it's better for us to know that, for you to be honest about that. It's not like we're going to call your boss and say, hey, guess what? They're not doing this. It really helps us when we educate others on real-time text to know how often challenging of wireless silent open line calls are happening. And if you do not know what challenge means that I'm going to launch my TTY and I'm going to try to communicate with my TTY device when I have a silent or open line on a wireless device. So currently the way voting stands, 17% responded, oh, got a few more. 20% responded as never, 16% as sometimes, 12% at usually, and 52% with always. I'll let the poll complete. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. So this is actually encouraging to me because in the past, we didn't have TTY access in the wireless network. And so I'm happy to see that many of you are challenging the wireless silent call with the TTY. What I'm familiar with is that some carriers may not be sending any type of signaling, and some may actually send some bototones when they convert it to TTY at this time. So you may actually have your TTY window open automatically, but I believe that the majority of those calls that will not happen. So it's really critical to re-implement this in your PSAP to challenge those wireless silent open line calls with the TTY and see if someone is out there. Let's go to the next slide, Sandy. So going back to the SOPs, this is one of those things that we need to take a look at what your existing policies are and ensure that folks know that there's new technology that they may be receiving, and so a reminder of doing the challenge of the silent open line call, and also just refresh the hearing carryover and voice carryover capabilities, and include all of this in the training and public education programs that you may have in your agency or your jurisdiction. Before we move to the next slide, I'll just point out that the slide that you're seeing right now, we did do some test calls, and this was one of those test calls to demonstrate that initiated RTT calls do get converted, and they do come in as a wireless call to the PSAP. And this particular one, they did open their TTY and begin challenging that silent call with their TTY. So let's move to the next slide, Sandy. This is one you can see a little bit better, I hope. It's another test call, and what I wanted to point out to you was how these calls will appear to you so that you have some idea. It was a Verizon call. It came in as a phase 2. You see that you've got your lat long, and in some instances, you'll get your uncertainty factors. On these calls, you'll be able to rebid like any other wireless call. And so this just demonstrates to you that it really looks like a regular call. And there is RTT, as Jeff spoke to earlier in the technology, is that the carriers are embedding this into their operating systems, into the phones. But in the early days, AT&T developed an app. And so there are some people out there that are using an app to initiate an RTT call. In those cases, they may come in as a VoIP call, or in Texas, we have a class of service, VMBL, so a VoIP mobile class of service. So the biggest thing I would like you to take away from this is to check what it appears in your call handling equipment. How does it come in? What does it look like? So that you can, educate your folks and be ready to serve this population that's using RTT.
Hey, Tony,
the next one. Oh, sure.
Can I add a couple of things on this slide before we go to the next one?
Absolutely. So
it is helpful maybe to understand a little bit more explicitly. Up until yesterday, there have been 4 nationwide wireless carriers. So Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Sprint. Of those 4 carriers, Sprint is still sending TTY. So Sprint has not elected yet to support real-time text on their network. And so any calls from Sprint will not have any type of real-time text component on it. For the other 3 providers, Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T, AT&T, in order to meet the initial deadlines, they enabled real-time text, as you mentioned, by allowing people to download an app from the App Store that would cause them to be able to use real-time text. Verizon and T-Mobile, they worked with manufacturers to build real-time text in natively. And so what this means is that when you place a call from the app, AT&T's app, it's going to come in and look a little bit different, as you said. It might look like a nomadic VoIP call instead of a wireless phase 2. If you use T-Mobile or Verizon, it'll likely come in as wireless phase 1 or phase 2 call and have TTY or the real-time text converted to TTY. There's also going to be some differences in depending on the carrier, as you alluded to, when they make a call to 911, sometimes, depending on the carrier, they will start to play TTY tones at the start of it that will inform the call handling equipment to maybe pop a TTY window, and some carriers won't. And so as you do testing, it's important to recognize that the need to test with phones that have from all of the different carriers and to be able to do test calls for real-time text from the different carriers, so you can see what the characteristics are for your call handling equipment. Okay, that's what I wanted to cover before the next slide.
So a question did come in. Have you heard if the purchase of Sprint by T-Mobile might affect whether they support RTT or not in the future?
Yes.
So yes, so the that just was finalized yesterday, and there is I don't have any information yet about how that is going to be affected. But we will have to take that into we'll have to keep monitoring that. But we don't have any information right now if they're going to continue as two separate networks or they're going to fold it into one network. My guess at this point is that there is going to be a migration from a technology platform away from some of the Sprint technology to the T-Mobile technology, and that it will eventually all be on real-time text using the T-Mobile network as the foundation. That would be my guess, just sort of knowing the two networks a little bit, but there's no information yet that we have on that.
So talking about testing, let's go to the next slide, Sandy. We have another poll. Uh-oh, there we go. So our question to you is, have you made any RTT test calls to your PSAP? And the responses, choices are no, and I never will. No, but because of your session, I now will, or yes, I have. So if you could please respond to those questions for us.
And while they're responding to the poll, another question came in. What about US Cellular? Are they not a nationwide company?
US Cellular is not characterized as a nationwide carrier, and so they are obligated to support real-time text under the FCC ruling of sort of the tier 2 carriers. And so their deadline is June 2021.
Okay, so we have 35% of attendees who have voted. Oh, just popped up just a little bit. Let me just give it a few more seconds, see if anyone else is going to vote on this poll. Again, folks, voting is anonymous. We have no way of reporting back. Okay, currently as it stands, 24% no and I never will, 48% no, but because of this session, I now will, and 28% state, yes, I have.
Awesome. Again, thank you for your responses. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I'm watching our time, and I want to be sure that we give some time at the end for more questions. So what you see here is the slide for the early adopter insights. And an early adopter refers to an agency who are the first to adopt a new product or technology before the majority of agencies do. And we need early adopters because they're important to provide feedback and help the development of such technologies to make sure that they're what they need to be for 911. And one such agency is North Central Texas 911 District in Arlington, Texas. And Christy Williams has been on the leading edge with RTT, and she has shared some insights that she would like for me to share with you. Christy has sat on some of our educational panels in the past and was not able to be with us on this one, but she shares these bullets here. One of the things, pilot testing and documentation. She says that testing is really the utmost priority as it teaches us about what we currently have in our centers and what it looks like. They tested everything they could think of, and then they went back and tested some more because they came up with more questions and more case scenarios that they wanted to run through. She admittedly says they didn't document as well as she had hoped because they were so curious about the results. But she does recommend testing in every jurisdiction because of those variables, and recommends logging all of the testing results and sharing those with others so that we can further develop our resources and what needs may exist for us to address later. She also has entered into some pilots with carriers for testing, so that may be something of interest for your agency. And once they get their, testing of the potential solutions. And so she has a customer equipment provider that has implemented some RTT solution. And so what you'll find is that there are some carriers out there that have implemented. There are some that are, they're actually working currently on RTT solutions, and then there may be some carriers out there, equipment providers that are planning it. It's on the roadmap. And so she encourages everyone to get with your equipment provider and see where they are with regards to RTT, what those plans are. Training, she addresses training as being is critical because we do have RTT capability to TTY today. So she says we need to understand RTT and the limitations of the current RTT to TTY environment. Also, the general public needs to understand the same. They have reached out to their deaf organizations and 911 audiences to educate the public as well as their telecommunicators. So it's really important. The public must be made aware of the availability of RTT and its potential limitations in today's environment. So pushing the market. Christy is known for pushing the market. She's a dear friend, and I'm thankful for that. For Christy expresses that we should encourage our vendors to provide those solutions in order to move from RTT to TTY to end-to-end RTT to RTT. The wireless carriers are going to require a letter of request similar to our text to 911 letters that when you were implementing text to 911 solutions. And the carriers are also giving a 6-month time period in which to deliver native RTT to the PSAPs. So it's going to follow the similar path that SMS text to 911 did. And she encourages also to consider making it a contractual requirement if you are looking at RFPs or anything that will make available new technologies to your center. So requests are based on contractual language, and timeframes will vary. So these are some of the things that Christy shared with us today. We go to the next slide. So these steps to receive RTT, Jeff, did you want to speak to this, or we just keep moving on? So those steps to receive RTT is some that Christy just mentioned. But first and foremost, we have to make sure right now that your TTYs are functional. So it's important that you are testing your TTY capabilities. And then test with those phone calls to make sure that those originating RTT calls are converting to TTY appropriately, and then talk to your vendors, as I already mentioned, and that we have to have on the PSAP side something in place before we can make that letter of request to the carriers. And so that's why we need to keep pushing that envelope. And then, as I said earlier, 6 months to comply with that request.
Yeah, and as part of that, can I just add, just so that we're all aware on the same page that this transition is really the transition that allows you to get sort of decommission some of the selective routers. Real-time text cannot go over selective routers. And so this transition to native real-time text also is in alignment with goals to transition generally over to ESINETs, next generation 911. All of that is in support of allowing this native real-time text to the carrier. So this is something that is important, and it pushes us all in the right direction. This is not something that's an offshoot from where we want to go. In fact, supporting real-time text in many ways can be a driver to really support the native next generation 911 architecture.
Thanks, Jeff. And this just again reiterates, but I do want to emphasize, consider implementing both SMS and RTT solutions. Some states have initiated some legislation to require both, but regardless of whether it's a mandate or not, it is definitely providing equal level of service, equitable level of service to all citizens to make 911 directly accessible for everyone. And so that is it that we have to share. Sandy, do we have any questions that are out there?
No, the questions that were asked have already been posed to the presenters.
So I would just like to maybe end a little bit saying, I appreciate that. I think from the poll question, we see there are a lot of people that are going to be doing some testing. I think that's fantastic, and that's the right thing that we need to do today. If you want some help with that, well, Tony and I have kind of gone through that a little bit. Drop us an email, contact us. We're happy to sort of lend some experience on that or any other questions you happen to have. Grateful for the opportunity to talk about this.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
And thank you to our presenters and our attendees for joining this session. The next session, the top 5 NG91 validations, will start shortly. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.